Hey kids! Welcome back to another week at Kids Life. I am out here camping, spending some time resting for a couple days. And as you might know, last week we started a new series all about resting, the day of rest. And we're actually kind of looking at the way Jesus challenged what the Pharisees thought about the Sabbath. Now, if you guys remember from last week, the Pharisees took the Sabbath very, very seriously because it was one of the 10 Commandments, and there were all these other extra rules that they wanted to make sure that they were always following. So they made sure that they always followed them, and they wanted to make sure that other people were always following them. And there were a lot of rules back then. You might think that you have a lot of rules you have to follow about going to bed at a certain time and doing your homework and doing chores and this and that, but they had over 600 rules in the Old Testament that these Pharisees would have had to follow. Now, let me tell you something. There are two types of people in this world. One of them is the type of people that think that the rules don't apply to them. Maybe they think rules are just a suggestion. Maybe that's some of you, where you think, these rules, they don't matter to me. These are for the other kids. I get to do what I want to do. Maybe you think that way. Or the other type of person is someone who thinks that life is all about the rules. Maybe your bedtime is 8 and you're always in bed by 7:45 just to make sure you're in bed on time, and you want to follow every single rule that you have at home and at school and wherever else you go. You want to follow the rules. Well, the Pharisees, they were like the second group of people. They always wanted to follow the rules, and they wanted to make sure that other people were following the rules as well. Now, one day, Jesus and his disciples, they were walking through a grain field, and they were doing this on the Sabbath. And the disciples got hungry, and they began to pick some wheat, some heads of wheat, and rub the kernels in their fingers and eat them. Yum, right? That doesn't seem like a bad thing. They just grabbed some wheat, ground it up, and ate it. But that was against the rule. And the Pharisees, they seemingly popped out of nowhere and said, "Hey, Jesus, do you see what your disciples are doing? They're eating grain. They're working on the Sabbath. What are you going to do about it?" They were trying to trap Jesus. And Jesus asked them, this is really funny. He said, "Haven't you ever read the scriptures?" And that's funny. That's a funny question because the Pharisees' job was to know and to memorize all the scriptures, but he asked them that anyway, kind of like in a sarcastic way. Like, haven't you read the scriptures? And he was pointing out that they would pick and choose parts of the scripture that they wanted to hold over other people and other parts that they would seemingly forget about. So he reminded them of the time that David was on the run from Saul, and he was with his friends, and they were hungry, and they went into the temple and they ate the bread that was only to be eaten by the high priest. It was set apart. He also reminded them of the laws that there were that would command for some priests to violate the Sabbath, and God didn't hold them as guilty because of that. And then he reminded them lastly of in the book of Hosea, where God says, "I desire mercy and not sacrifice." Jesus was making a really important statement here. He was saying this. He said that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Let me say that again. The Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So what does that mean? Well, let me explain. Remember, I said there are two types of people in the world. Well, the one type of people who were like the Pharisees, they think that life is all about the rules. They think that man was made for the Sabbath, that we were made by God so that we could follow all of these rules and eventually go to heaven. But that's not what life is about. That's not why we have these rules. And maybe you're like that second group of people, and now you're thinking, woohoo, okay, it's not about the rules. It's not about following the Sabbath or following this or that rule. But that's not what it is either. It's not that we just forget about the rules now and we can do whatever we want all the time, because Jesus said the Sabbath is made for man. So it's not just made to be a rule, but it was made for man. It was a gift for us because God knows, remember when he created everything, he created in 6 days and then he rested the seventh day. Not because he needed to, but because he knew that we would need to rest and we would need that rhythm. So God created the Sabbath so we would remember to take a day every single week and rest and focus on him and get our hearts recentered on what he is doing in our lives, and that we need that. Not just it's something that we should do because it's a rule, but because it's better for us. It is healthy for us. Now, I have some good news for you. There's not actually just two types of people in this world, but there's a third one, and that person is Jesus. And Jesus, if you guys didn't know, Jesus lived a perfect, sinless life. That means he never broke a single rule his entire life. He always followed every single rule that there ever was. But he didn't do that just because he wanted to not get in trouble or because he wanted to go to heaven someday. He did that because underneath every single rule that God ever made is this idea, and that idea is love. Every rule is motivated by love. Jesus didn't come to get rid of all the rules, but he came to fulfill them, and he fulfilled them with love and grace. And Jesus' grace doesn't mean that there's no more rules, but what it means is that because we know his love, because he chose to love us and call us his children and adopt us into his family, that when we experience that love, that we would want to share that love with others. And when we love other people the way we love ourselves, and when we love God the way that we are supposed to, then it's not about just following rules, but because of that love, we end up following the rules. So here's what I want you guys to do this week. When you leave here, don't go home and think about all of the rules, but instead think about, what can I do to love my family? What can I do to love my friends? And what can I do to love God? And when you do that, it's not about following the rules, but it's about giving others the same love that God has given you. So I will see you guys later. Have a good week. Bye.